Sex is the life force energy that runs through us all. Can you use sexual energy for your spiritual evolution? Or perhaps for emotional healing? Is it even possible? Clinical sexologist Dr. Martha Tara Lee will explore all these and more on Eros Evolution on Home Times Radio.
I'm fighting to you. Hello, and welcome to Eros Evolution. This is where sexuality and spirituality meet. This is the last show that I'm doing for 2017, and also the last show that I'm doing for maybe a while, because I'm going on a break with Home Times Radio. After doing this show for coming to 3 years now, I need a break. And although I've learned a lot from doing this show, I just need some time to regroup. And I've learned a lot from my guests. I've learned a lot from being a guest. And I believe that I've become better in terms of being able to think on my feet over the last 3 years. So let me introduce my guest for today's show. And today's show, riding on the Me Too movement, where there's a lot of talk about sexual harassment, sexual assault, and consent. We have a relevant topic, and today's topic is Reclaim Your Sexuality Despite Childhood Abuse. This is going to be with sexual abuse recovery coach Rachel Grant, and we'll be exploring how abuse impacts one's ability to create intimate relationships and to reclaim our sexuality. We'll be discussing some key strategies that will make it possible for one to have deeply fulfilling and connected relationships. So Rachel Grant is the owner and founder of Rachel Grant Coaching. She's a sexual abuse recovery coach, as I mentioned, and holds a MA, Master of Arts, in Counseling Psychology. She's the author of Beyond Surviving, the Final Stage in Recovery from Sexual Abuse. She works with survivors of childhood sexual abuse who are beyond sick and tired of feeling broken, unfixable, and burdened by the past. She helps them let go of the pain of abuse and finally feel normal. So she has a program called Beyond Surviving, the same title of the book that she has been specifically designed to change the way we think about and heal from abuse. Based on her educational training, study of neuroscience, and lessons learned from her own journey, she has successfully used this program since 2007 to help her clients break free from the past and move on with their lives. And you can find her at rachelgrantcoaching.com. That's Rachel with an E, no A. And you can find her on Facebook. She has a Facebook group called Real Talk with Rachel. So it's facebook.com/groups/Real Talk with Rachel, no A. So yes, welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thanks, Martha. So nice to be here.
Yes. So you reached out to me and suggested yourself as my guest, which, I'm very honored that you reached out to me. And I really wanted to have you on, of course. And so thanks for doing this.
It's a joy. It's a real joy to be here and to have this conversation. Exactly as you said, at a time when things are so up around sexual abuse, and so many women in particular, but men also are coming forward and talking about this topic. So it's very timely. So yeah, right on.
Yes. So tell us more about the Me Too movement, what you know of it, just to summarize it and make it into context for some people. I'm sure lots of people heard about it, but maybe some of them are, not quite sure what it's about.
Right. Well, so, in the face of I think a big propellant of this was Harvey Weinstein, who is a Hollywood director and, socialite, and women started coming forward to share their stories of how he had sexually harassed and assaulted them. And Alyssa Milano tweeted, if every woman who had ever experienced sexual harassment or assault were to, share a hashtag Me Too in their online profiles, it might shed some light. And this was actually building off a movement that had been started years before. I'm not recalling her name in this moment, but I think there's just something about where we are at this particular time where survivors of abuse are getting very fed up with the lack of support in our criminal systems and the justice system, and being silenced. And it was really amazing, Martha, to just see like how that really caught fire. And so many people were, coming forward and sharing their stories. It also started really important dialogues about the role that men play in society and in these experiences. What happens for people who, don't just, who don't just have the opportunity, who don't feel safe or comfortable sharing that they are a survivor. So that brought up questions, particularly in the Facebook group that you were mentioning earlier. We had lots of conversation and dialogue about, is it safe to identify with the hashtag Me Too? If I don't, does that somehow make me like someone who's not participating in this big social movement? But all in all, I think it's really just a call forward, and then people becoming more emboldened and ready to break the silence and refuse to be victimized any longer.
So yeah, you're right in that the Me Too hashtag is, I believe, triggered a lot of people because, like you mentioned, the pressure to also share their stories, and the shaming of how come you didn't say this like for years, and also I read about men who say, where is my place in this Me Too movement, and feeling a lot of surprise, shame, and also unsure of what they can do to support the women in their lives.
Most definitely, yeah.
So when we talk about sexual abuse, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, please, we can go on.
Go ahead.
So I was just going to say that for men, in my practice, something that I've noticed over the past I've been, in this world for 10 plus years as a, practitioner, a healer. Of course, I've been in this all my life, from the age of 10 when I began being sexually abused by my grandfather. But it has been interesting in the last year that I've been seeing more men joining my group, more men coming to my monthly support groups and signing up, working with me in my Beyond Surviving program. So I'm excited to see that because it certainly is a population that we don't want to see, ignored in all of this, because the numbers for men being abused are not as extreme as for women, but they're right up there. And so they too, have a voice in this, experience.
Definitely. So just remember that as we go on in today's show, even though sexual abuse does happen a lot more for women, let's not make it a gender thing. It does affect all genders. And it's really important to not shame people for their experiences. For instance, why didn't you fight back? And I believe Rachel will talk more about the responses people have when they get sexually abused. So I know you were sexually abused yourself, and if you don't mind, share a little bit of your story and what brought you to doing this coaching. It seems like you specialize in sexual abuse recovery.
Yeah, thank you, Martha. I do, and it certainly wasn't my intention, but, life leads you where it's going to lead you sometimes. And, my story really begins when I was 5 years old. My grandfather came to live in our home, and I was really excited about that at the time. My older brother and sister really didn't pay me much mind, so my grandfather was like this new friend, and someone to hang out with and spend time with. And really, some of my fondest memories of my grandfather are of sitting out on the front porch, swinging. We grew up in, small town Oklahoma, and just sitting there kind of watching people talking and enjoying just being outside. When I was 10 years old, it was, one of these days where we were sitting out on the porch just like any other day. Nothing seemed unusual or strange about it until my grandfather began touching me. And, in that moment, Martha, I'm 10 years old. I don't really understand what's going on. It's really confusing. I'm thinking maybe he's confused and doesn't even realize where he's touching me. And so I, wiggle and move around, but he just continued. And that was the beginning of, a long stretch of time in which he was abusing me. And it's likely that he was abusing me before that, but I don't have clear memories, which is very common for survivors. We don't often have succinct memory. And so, that really led me into this place of trying to figure out what was going on and why this was happening to me and feeling very afraid. And my parents eventually figured out what was going on and moved him out of the home, which was great. But that really didn't change the way I was feeling. Yeah, I had come to think that I was causing this, I was bad, etc. And I really refused support and help. I wanted to try to pretend that everything was okay. So after many years of that, when I hit my 20s, I really noticed that this was impacting my life. I couldn't deny it any longer. And that's when I started reaching out for help and doing therapy and reading books, etc. But I really reached a point, Martha, in my journey where I got very frustrated with that whole process because I felt like I was continually talking about everything that had happened. But when I asked for support and how to change that or how to do things differently, it seemed like nobody had any answers for me. And I was really surprised by that. I was like, what am I paying you for if you don't really know actually how to help me? And so, fast forward, and, I'll jump ahead a little bit.
Yeah. So we have a break. We'll
I'll pause there. Yeah,
I'll pause there. Sorry to interrupt.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of Om Times Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of Om Times. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Hi, I'm Kelly Fox, host and astrologer of The Astrology Show. Each week, I'll give you access to the current transits, which are a valuable tool that provide astrological information to help unlock the potential each of us has. Understanding the stars can help steer us in the right direction to make better informed choices. So if you're wondering what's going to happen in your week ahead, be sure to tune in to The Astrology Show for guidance, Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Every 2 minutes, an American is sexually assaulted. The majority of victims know their attacker. It could be your friend, your neighbor, or someone you met at a party. If you said no, it's rape, and it's a crime. This is Christina Ricci with RAIN. Call the National Sexual Assault Hotline today at 1-800-656-HOPE or visit rain.org. That's RAINN.org.
Brought to you by RAIN and this station.
Hello, and welcome back to Eros Evolution. This is where we explore the link between sex and spirit. And today we're talking about a topic that is really heavy, and it's going to be the last episode of Eros Evolution for a while. I'm taking a break from doing this show. And having done this for 3 years, I need a little break to regroup. So, yes, today's show is Reclaim Your Sexuality Despite Childhood Abuse. You're listening to this show on the Om Times Radio Network, and you can share this show by going to the link omtimes.com/mobile. With this link, you'll be able to listen to the show without needing to download any app. We are with Rachel Grant, the owner and founder of Rachel Grant Coaching, and she's a sexual abuse recovery coach. And we started the show by asking her to explain more about the Me Too movement and also about her personal journey. And we were interrupted by the break. So, Rachel, would you like to continue with part 2?
Yeah, part 2 continued. Thanks, Martha. So, yeah, just to go back a little bit, when my grandfather was sexually molesting me, so he was touching me and drawing me into, his space, and I have vague memories of oral rape, but there are a lot of pieces that are just missing. And, for those of you who are listening who've gone through sexual abuse, if that's your experience as well, I want you to just know that that's really normal. Very seldom do survivors of sexual abuse have very coherent, chronological memories, and that's just because of what's happening on a neurological level when we're being traumatized. When my mother just one day saw what was happening, and so she and my dad immediately moved him out of our home. And they wanted me to go to therapy. They even tried to, they took me, once or twice. But that was a really hard, time for me. I was 10 years old. I was confused. I was scared. I really just wanted to hide away from all this. I wanted to try to push it as far away as I possibly could and just try to, be a normal little girl, right? The problem with that is no matter how much pushing away we try to do, the impact of abuse is going to be there. So through all of my teens, I struggled. I struggled with anger. I struggled with really poor boundaries, very low self-esteem. I just was constantly confused about myself and who I was and relationships and trust. I mean, you name it, I struggled with it. And when I reached my 20s, I was, starting a relationship. When I was 18, I started a relationship, and I started to notice that I was not equipped to do this. I really had no idea how to navigate any of this and was so easily triggered and went into panic attacks, went into, fight or flight, kind of responses. And so I started going to therapy. And as I was saying, I hit a place in my journey with therapy where I got really frustrated because it seemed to me that I was doing a lot of talking about the experiences and making connections as to why I did certain things the way that I did, like why I struggled to trust people. And that's important, Martha. Don't get me wrong. Like, that is an important part of the journey. But at a certain point, I started thinking there has to be more than this. Right? There has to be more than just talking about everything that happened. And when over and over again, the resources that I was going to were saying to me, well, this is just kind of a life sentence. You're just going to have to deal with it. Just keep talking about it. I thought, no, that just can't be right. And so that's what really spurred me on. I said, I'm going to try to approach this differently. And I, started studying neuroscience. I went and did my master's in counseling psychology. I started reading what I could. And really, I just started to try to think about like I was healing from an injury, just like any other injury. So like if you get a broken leg, right, you don't just kind of sit down and go, well, shoot, my leg's broken. I guess that's just the way it's going to be, right? We don't do that. So why do I see people doing this when it comes to abuse and trauma? And so for me, I just kept asking that same question. So for any issue that I had in my life, the next question was, how do I heal my brain? Like on a neurological level, what needs to be healed? And then on a behavioral level, what do I need to be able to do differently? What skill do I need? What behavior do I need that I didn't learn because I was, in the midst of abuse? And so bit by bit, all of this just started to form, and it became, what I was using on a day-to-day basis to heal myself. And eventually, with the support and, prompting of my friends, I said, okay, let me see if this works for other people. It's worked for me. It's changed my life. And so back in 2007 is when I launched the first Beyond Surviving program and started, kind of trying out sharing these strategies with others. So, fast forward 10 years, the program has grown and the curriculum has become, more solidified, and, I've written the guidebook. And then, this is what I do full time now, is really support survivors who are sick and tired of that feeling of being broken and unfixable, and like nothing they're doing is making a difference. And so that's how I get to spend my days to now, and I love it.
That's great. So thank you so much for sharing your personal story. I'm sure talking about it every time does bring up memories, and sometimes we just don't want to talk about it anymore. Just move on with our lives. So yes, I appreciate you for sharing it, and I also appreciate what you're saying, that different things that you've tried going for therapy didn't work, and there were people who were just asking you to keep talking and resharing about your story, and it wasn't helping. So you came out with your own program. So before we go into the specifics about your program, I just want to know if there are other programs that are similar, or, like what makes your program unique?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that I've really tried to keep my attention on in developing the Beyond Surviving program. The first is I really tried to think about the order in which we address the various topics that need to be addressed for survivors of abuse. One of the things I noticed, Martha, is that when I would go to therapy, I would sit down and, start talking about whatever was on my mind, right? Whatever I was struggling with, whatever felt most present or difficult for me in that moment. And the therapist just kind of met me where I was at, which again is a really great model for therapy. But what I also noticed is that sometimes I would be bringing to the table something like, I really am struggling to set boundaries. And the therapist would give me some tool or have me reflect or do something, but they weren't actually getting to the root of why I was struggling with that, which one of the roots of why we had struggled to set boundaries is shame. So one of the ways that the Beyond Surviving program I think is really unique and powerful is that I've really spent dedicated time thinking about, okay, in order to do this, we have to be able to do this. And in order to be able to do this thing, like trust people, we actually have to be able to do this thing, which is communicate, et cetera. And so that's why it's a curriculum. It's a program that takes people step by step, through this healing process. And I think the other distinction is that it's coaching and not therapy. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So so I'm hearing the distinction between therapy and coaching. So coaching is very much focused on moving forward towards their goals and breaking down into smaller steps. And it's I believe much more dynamic than just talking about the issue. So I hear what you're saying, because I appreciate it, which is instead of being reactive and trying to fix little fires, you actually get to the real root issue, which is what you are talking about. So what it sounds like is that you're providing them with skills.
Yeah, I think that's the other piece of this is that, we might talk about things that have happened in the past, but only for the purpose of informing why things are going the way they are in the present. And then the very next question we always ask over and over again is, well, what do we do about that? How do we actually resolve this? What strategy do we need to have? What tool do we need to have? What shift in mindset do we need to have? And I think because of that, the people who have, graduated from the Beyond Surviving program, it's really about two things. One, it's about getting complete about the past, but it's also about feeling equipped to kind of deal with life going forward, because things keep happening, right? Life can be challenging. New challenges can come up. So it's really, those are the two things that I'm really working on with my clients, is that resolving the past piece, but also feeling like, okay, whatever comes forward in my life, tomorrow or the next day or a year from now, I have a toolkit that I can refer to and I can use over and over again as new challenges arise, but I'm not constantly dealing with the past, right? There's not this sense of always being in the past and working with it and dealing with it. That's complete. And instead, we're able to be present and deal with life as it is right now.
Yeah, that's really important. So with 2 minutes to break, can you list out some of the skills or tools that you provide your clients with?
Sure. Yeah. One of the very first things that I always focus on is what I call a little boot camp for the brain. So for me, the real eye-opener, the thing that really set in motion all of the change was understanding how the brain is impacted by trauma and creating strategies and interventions to help retrain the brain on a neurological level. So, and the result of that is we start to be able to have a healthier nervous system, we're less reactive, we're less easily triggered, all of those PTSD symptoms start to drop away. And so getting the brain healthy is, always where I start with my clients. And then from there, we tackle shame. And, really looking at shame as the root of our dismissing our own needs and our own desires. Skills, we work on relationship skills, building confidence, and the program I've tried to make as comprehensive as possible so that we delve in to any of those areas where people are really, looking for some support and guidance.
That sounds really fabulous. So what happens with some PTSD people that I think I have worked with is that they go into a kind of hypervigilance and overdrive in terms of their thinking. So after the break, I'd like to ask you what are some of the first things they can do so that they stop going into being reactive all the time?
Okay. Yeah. Sounds great.
Cool.
Free your mind with Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment, a philanthropic organization. Their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
What's up? This is Brad and Mike from Lincoln Park for Life Beat, the music industry fights AIDS.
Listen up, times are tough and you get a lot of things thrown your way. If you're being pressured to have sex and you're not ready, then say no. If you're having sex, be smart and use protection. Respect yourself and protect yourself.
For more information, call the National AIDS Hotline at 1-800-342-AIDS or log on to www.lifebeat.org.
And welcome back to the second half of today's show, Reclaim Your Sexuality Despite Childhood Abuse, well, with Rachel Grant, and you can find her at rachelgrantcoaching.com. That's Rachel without an A, with an E. That's RACHEL, Grant with a T, coaching.com. So Rachel was explaining to us before the break about her own proprietary program to support sexual abuse survivors so that they can go beyond surviving to being able to thrive in their lives. And so she talked about the difference in her program based on her own personal experiences and struggles with therapists and with therapy. and her approach is very much more dynamic. It involves coaching, and so this definitely does sound like an important step forward for people who want to seek help from somebody who specializes in this field. So yes, so I was going to ask you, mentioned before the break, what about those people who are having PTSD, they're showing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and their minds are in overdrive, and they are using basically their mind to protect themselves.
Right.
What would you suggest that the first thing that they begin to do?
Right. Yeah, well, okay, so when we're talking about PTSD, so first of all, what we want to understand is that whenever we are having experiences on a neurological level, neurons are firing off and building connections and associations. These neuronal pathways, if you will, are being kind of built. And whenever we have an experience in the present day that even just closely resembles those past experiences or has an element from a past experience, the same exact neuronal pathway is going to light up. The brain is kind of trying to be very efficient in that way. It doesn't want to try to create, brand new stuff every single time. It wants to just draw on what it thinks it already kind of knows or understands about the world. And so essentially PTSD, one of the responses of like being triggered is results because the brain thinks that, this stimulus that's here in our present day is the same as a stimulus that was there in the past, and therefore starts to set us off into this, response system. The amygdala, the part of your brain that really controls that fight, flight, or freeze response, basically immediately gets ignited. And, the trouble with that, Martha, is that the amygdala has thousands of channels in which to kind of flood our system, which leads to that hyperactivity, that alertness. And for a lot of survivors of trauma, essentially what's happened is the amygdala has been clicked on and it hasn't turned off. And so we're walking through life with this, like, almost imagine it like there's this live wire constantly exposed. And anything can kind of set off our system. And so we became hypervigilant, we become hyper alert, we become hyper reactive. So one of the first things that we have to do is really kind of take charge of our brain again and learn how to teach the amygdala to go through the normal cycles that we want it to go through. So we want it to have a baseline where it's just at rest, there's nothing happening, there's no charge, and then we want it to be able to be, ignited when we need it to be, right? Like if the tiger's running at you, you want your amygdala to work so that you'll get scared and run away, but we don't want it to be constantly on. And so one of the ways that we can begin to retrain the brain and is to interrupt that amygdala cycle. So when we start to get triggered, to actually use what I call pause button techniques. So that rather than that escalation continuing to happen, we interrupt the flooding of the amygdala. Sometimes it can be as simple as just stopping and naming like 5 things you see in front of you. Asking a question that you don't know the answer to right away. And I won't go really deep into the neuroscience, all of this, just given our time, but essentially what that is doing is think about it like you're kind of putting a dam and cutting off the flooding of the amygdala so that your system can come back to kind of a resting place. And the more you do that, the more you're able to get out of those hyper-reactive, hyper-alert states. And you come to where you're in more of a peace place more of the time than not.
Yes. Thank you very much. So that's very useful to know for me. And so let's continue the show proper by talking about how abuse impacts one's ability to create intimate relationships. So what is intimacy in your definition, and how do we block intimacy in our lives, especially for those who are survivors of abuse?
Yeah, this is such an important topic. At the end of the day, my belief is that relationships are really at the core, of everything that we do. And if we have healthy relationships, then we're healthier people. And struggling with intimacy is, of course, a really common outcome for survivors of abuse and trauma because, it's been twisted. It's been, maligned by abuse. My favorite definition of intimacy that I, teach my clients is that it's private and personal knowledge acquired through study and experience with another person. And I love that because in many ways it simplifies intimacy. It takes it out of this thing that always has to be very deep and confronting and intense and can be instead like, wow, I'm getting to know someone. That's intimacy. Oh, I'm sharing this experience with this person. That's intimacy. And so one of the things that I talk about with my clients is what I call intimacy breaking behaviors. And what that really means, Martha, is that as a result of trauma, we'll have a level of tolerance for intimacy. Like I can go this far, I can get this close to people, but then after that, I want to just, run away, essentially. And so as we start to name and notice these behaviors that are there, like, for example, one of them is sarcasm. That one's a big one for me that just breaks down intimacy. Another one can be actually just being super busy. Like you keep yourself so busy that you're never able to actually spend enough time with people to develop intimate relationships. So as we identify those breaking behaviors, we can then use strategies to help increase our tolerance for intimacy and have those rich, connected relationships that ultimately we're longing for, but that feel really far out of reach when we're, in the midst of that abuse or the trauma or the pain of the results of abuse. Did that answer your question?
Definitely. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that happens is that because the sexual abuse caused them to have pain, possibly physical and definitely emotional, mental. And so it's much easier to just run away from intimacy, physical intimacy, sexual intimacy. And so maybe they may be functional in all areas of their lives, including being able to have and maintain relationships. But then when it comes to sex, this is when they have problems. Yeah. Exactly. And, one of the things that I talk about in the Beyond Surviving program is the connection between trust, vulnerability, and intimacy. And that when we have those things in place, that becomes a gateway and an opening to sexuality. Of course, there's a lot of sex that exists without those in place. But by and large, my clients are looking to build those kinds of relationships where they have those levels of trust and vulnerability. And, there are some common, things that people struggle with as a result of abuse when it comes to this area of their lives. Everything from dissociation to having flashbacks during sex to, physical pain. And for me, there are a lot of layers when it comes to healing sexuality. But what made the biggest difference for me in my journey and that I, really focus on with my clients is looking at a key distinction between sex as obligation and sex as a choice. That's, to my mind, the very first thing that we've got to tackle. Because for many, many survivors of sexual abuse, this distinction is not in place. And so the sex that was occurring when they were abused was coming from a place of obligation or force or manipulation. And without that distinguishing that that's no longer the case, and instead, we have choice now as adults, all of that stuff just starts to carry over, right? It just floods in. It just gets all kind of mishmashed together. And so making that distinction, to my mind, is the first step towards being able to reclaim our sexuality. Definitely, that's very important. And I like what you have used to differentiate between the link between trust, intimacy, and vulnerability. I think there can be situations where there is trust of the person. However, their inability to allow themselves to be vulnerable is stopping them. And then also the intimacy part, their willingness, their comfort to actually do something. So it's one thing to feel that you want to be close or to feel close to someone. It's another thing to actually do something about it, to actually not just be holding hands, but actually move on to maybe kissing or penetrative sex. So that's really important to have the vocabulary for them to begin to explore the areas in which they can go deeper into working on themselves and healing themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we begin to notice that connection, then we can, first of all, work on trust. And this is exactly what I mean by order of operations. Because I'll have a lot of clients come to me and say, well, I'm having a hard time having sex with my partner, or I feel really shut down in that area of my life. And I'll say, okay, I get it, and we will get to it, I promise. But first, we're going to do like this, 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 and this. Because if we try to just dive right in to resolving the sexuality, you know, likely we're not going to make much progress. You might actually end up re-traumatized because you won't be able to actually do the things that you need to do in order to, you know, transform in this particular area of your life. So, you know, when we start to understand how all these things are interconnected, then, you know, we just become empowered, I think, Martha, and things just start to kind of open up in ways that, you know, they won't if we try to do, you know, if we try to tackle something before, you know, we have other things in place.
So just to summarize some of the points that you mentioned just now, we're talking about people who have been sexually abused, and it's important to reclaim your sexuality, because when you have healthy relationships with other people, then that's when you feel healthy yourself. That's one of the aspects of being human. And by confronting the pain, the fears, the past, we can move on more bravely and confidently. So that's the whole point of even working on yourself. And you're not going to realize this sometimes by yourself. You have to work through it with people and in being in relationship with other people. So so stay tuned, and we'll come back and wrap up the show.
Bringing you the best of the conscious minds in the world. Om Times Radio, your conscious lifestyle on steroids. The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
It's on us to stop sexual assault.
To get in the way before it happens.
To get a friend home safe.
And to not blame the victim.
It's on us.
To look out for each other.
To not look the other way.
It's on us to stand up.
To step in.
To take responsibility.
It's on us, all of us,
to stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
And welcome back to Eros Evolution. This is where we explore the link between sex and spirit. I'm a sexologist myself. My name is Martha. I'm from Eros Coaching. That's EROS coaching.com. In my work, I do work with survivors of sexual abuse. And my specialization, however, is really working with a lot of people who have sexual misinformation and lack of sex education. So I work with a lot of sexually, I would call, ignorant people who don't even know how to have sex or don't know how to consummate their marriage, for instance. I also work with men and women, of course. with men, premature ejaculation, delayed ejaculation, erectile difficulties. However, today we have Rachel Grant, and she specializes in sexual abuse recovery, and she's from Rachel Grant Coaching, and you can find her at rachelgrantcoaching.com. That's Rachel without an A, with an E. And on Facebook, she has a group. That's facebook.com/groups/Real Talk with Rachel without an A again. And if you go to her website, you will be able to download her free guide, 3 stages of recovery from childhood abuse, which will help you determine exactly where you're at in your in your healing journey and what kind of support you need right now. So just before the show, went to her website. She has a fantastic website. It's very informational. You can also register for her complimentary 60-minute call, so you can speak with her directly, see if she can help you. But to get to know her, one of the first things you would like to do probably is to download this free guide. So yes, I recommend you go to her website, rachelgrantcoaching.com. Just to give another shout out in case you didn't join us at the start of the show, she's the author of Beyond Surviving, and she also has a proprietary program, her own program called Beyond Surviving, which is designed to change the way we think about and heal from abuse. So this is all based on her not just educational training, her study of neuroscience, but also lessons that she learned from her own journey. And she's been using this program successfully since 2007, which is 10 years, helping her clients break free from the past and move on with their lives. So I've really enjoyed having this show today. However, this being Eros Evolution, I always ask my guests, what is the link between sex and spirit for them? So as professionals, coaches, trainers, therapists, a lot of my guests would answer in their professional capacity, but I like to ask them what they see personally is the link between sex and spirit. So Rachel, what is the link between sex and spirit for you? How would you explain that to people who don't really know the link at all?
Such a powerful question. I want to go back and listen to more of your interviews to hear how other people have answered. I'm so curious. Oh, my goodness. Here's the thing that I think has happened for me in this area of my life as I've, continued to heal and mature and grow and reclaim sexuality. For me, spirit really is all about our best, most wonderful self. Spirit is that part of us that just is, that doesn't have any labels, that doesn't have any goals or intentions or past even in a lot of ways. Spirit is the most present part of ourselves. And I think that when we're able to have sex with our partner or partners or however it looks for you, and you are able to just be that self, and you're not bringing in any of that history, even any of the past, any of the future, and you're just fully there present. For me, that's the best way I can think to describe the link between spirit and sexuality.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, so I know it's a bit of a abrupt switch in the show, talking about sexual abuse and the blocks to intimacy just now, and popping that question about sex and spirit. So for listeners who are spiritual, because this is Om Times Radio Network, it's really important for people to understand the link between sex and spirit, and that's the reason why I always ask this question, and I appreciate your answer. So let's move back to this guide that you have. In the guide, you say 3 stages of recovery. So what are the stages?
So one of the things that has really formulated for me through the course of my, work in this field is really beginning to look at the process that a person goes through in this healing journey. And I think of it as 3 stages. Now, these aren't necessarily linear. Sometimes you're in, further along in one area than you are in another. But generally, to think of it as 3 stages is just easier for our brain. The first stage is that of the victim stage. And this is the stage that we're in when we either are actually still being victimized, or we're in denial about the past, or we're trying to push it away, right? I talked about that in my own story, right? Like immediately after the abuse, when I just wanted to pretend like nothing had happened. And for a lot of those of us who've gone through trauma and abuse, we go through that stage where we want to just push it away. It's no big deal. I'm fine. Once we start to acknowledge that something has happened and that has impacted our lives, that's actually what bridges us to the second stage of survivor. And it's during this survivor stage when we begin to talk about the trauma, we begin to make associations and understand why we do the things that we do. We get support, we get help, we start reading books, right, where we kind of throw ourselves into this world of recovery and understanding. It's like we're finally ready to take a look at everything that's been going on. From there, when we're finally ready to move from this place of introspection and analysis and acknowledgement to action, that's what really moves us into the Beyond Survivor stage, what I call the Beyond Survivor stage. And that's when we're really focusing on acquiring those skills and tools that we need in order to move forward in our lives so that our attention starts being more in the present and the future rather than in the past. And in the checklist that you can download from the website, I talk a bit more about each of those stages, but I also talk about what the goals are for each stage and the type of support that you want to find or seek out based on which stage you're in. Because if let's say we're more in that kind of bridging the gap from the victims to survivor stage, but we land on, something that is more action oriented, it's actually not going to really work because you're not ready for that yet. And so a lot of times people get stuck at various stages, one, because they're not sure what the goals are and what to accomplish, or they're not getting the best type of support to actually help them move through that stage. So it's a great little guidebook to help you assess, where you are in that journey and to help you learn what types of support you want to reach out for to really help you based on that.
Beautiful. So once again, the three stages are victim, survivor, and beyond survivor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm looking at your guide, and I really like it. I really like your downloadable checklist. And what happens is in the checklist, she talks about the stages. She talks a little bit about what the stage is, and then there's a checklist that you can take yourself through, whether you see that you have graduated or completed that phase. So you can actually start to assess for yourself where you are at. And then there are some free resources there, what support you can get. So I think it's really useful and worth your time to download, listeners. So thank you for sharing with us that. So one last question before we need to go. What do you see is one of the biggest challenges for survivors of sexual abuse when it comes to intimacy and sex?
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately the biggest challenge is being able to separate themselves from the past and to set new rules and to set new guidelines and a new way of engaging as adults who are having sex from their own place of choice, their own place of desire. And getting there can be really challenging. Understanding those distinctions, doing that, mental shift work, and finding that way to really step into, this is how I want sex to be for me now. All forms of abuse are traumatizing and have great impact. Sexual abuse is particularly nefarious because our bodies are being, harmed. And our sexuality is being used in a way that it wasn't meant to be used. And so finding ways to release any of those, that shame around, how your body responded to being touched, even though it was abuse, is a key struggle and big challenge. But the good news in all of this is, regardless of whatever the challenge is, there are ways that we can heal from that, the ways that we can move forward from that. And so, that's really where I keep my attention, is what can we continue to do? What can we continue to build? I've just recently started an online program to help people with the, retraining of the brain strategies and skills. It's like an introductory program. I'm also working with some colleagues to develop trainings for medical professionals, because so many medical professionals are not trauma informed, and then survivors go for their annual exams or whatever it might be and experience, re-triggering. So there's lots of work still to be done, but ultimately, for those of you out there who are in this journey of healing from sexual abuse, I just want to encourage you to not give up. There really are some great strategies that are available and resources that are available. So I just invite you to come check out the website, and there's lots of free resources available as well. And if I can be of any help to you in your journey, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you very much. And we certainly gain a lot from you sharing in this show. So Rachel is based in San Francisco, California. So do you do face-to-face coaching as well?
I work via Skype. So I work with clients all over the country and all over the world.
Okay, got it. So be sure to check out her website. That's rachelgrantcoaching.com. And please also share this show with people, because I'm sure lots of people can benefit from listening to it and beginning to have more awareness of what they need to do to reclaim their sexuality despite childhood abuse. So this is Martha, and I wish you well, happy holidays, and happy new year to 2018. And stay tuned, keep in touch, check out my website, that's Eros.